The winds were howling and the rain was coming down in sheets as a man found himself lost in the midst of a raging hurricane. He had been driving home from a business trip when he suddenly found himself caught in the storm and unable to find his way back to the main road. As he drove through the desolate countryside, he noticed that the winds were getting stronger and the rain was coming down harder. He could barely see the road in front of him and he was afraid that he would crash or get stuck in a ditch. Suddenly, his car came to a stop and he realized that he had run out of gas. The man tried to call for help on his cell phone, but there was no signal. He was completely isolated, with no way to call for help and no way to escape the fury of the storm. The man took shelter in an old abandoned barn, but the winds were so strong that he was afraid the roof would collapse at any moment. He huddled in a corner, shivering from the cold and the fear of what might happen to him. As the night wore on, the man heard strange noises coming from outside the barn. He couldn't tell if it was the wind or something else, but it was a haunting and eerie sound that filled him with dread. He realized that he was not alone in the storm, and that something was watching him from the darkness. The man spent a sleepless and terrifying night in the barn, waiting for the storm to pass and praying for help to arrive. When the sun finally rose and the storm began to subside, he stumbled out of the barn, only to find that he was completely lost and had no idea where he was. To this day, no one knows what happened to the man. Some say that he was never seen again, while others claim that he was never truly alone in the storm and that something followed him out of the darkness. But one thing is for certain, the experience left him changed forever, haunted by the memories of his terrifying night lost in the hurricane. The night was dark and the clouds were thick as the pilot took off from the airport, heading towards his destination. He had been flying for years and had seen it all, but tonight was different. Something felt off, and he couldn't shake the feeling that he was being watched. As he flew through the sky, he suddenly saw strange lights appearing in the clouds. At first, he thought it was a trick of the light, but as he got closer, he realized that the lights were not natural. They were ghostly and ethereal, floating in the air with no apparent source. The pilot tried to ignore the lights and focus on his flight, but they seemed to be getting closer and closer. He tried to communicate with air traffic control, but there was no response. He was completely alone in the sky with these mysterious and haunting lights. As he flew deeper into the clouds, he saw that the lights had taken on a more sinister form. They were no longer just lights, but ghostly figures, floating in the air and following his every move. The pilot felt a cold fear grip at his heart as he realized that he was flying through a sky filled with ghosts. Despite his fear, he kept flying, determined to reach his destination. But the ghosts seemed to be getting more and more agitated, and the pilot was suddenly enveloped in a cloud of fog. When the fog cleared, he found that he was no longer flying through the sky, but instead was hovering above a strange and eerie landscape. The pilot was never seen or heard from again, and no one knows what happened to him or his plane. Some say that he was lost in a world between life and death, flying through the skies with the ghosts forever. Others claim that he was taken by the spirits of the sky and was never seen again. But one thing is for certain, the pilot's flight remains a mystery to this day, and a haunting reminder of the dangers of flying through the sky with ghosts. It was just another ordinary day at the meatpacking plant, and the workers were going about their duties, preparing the daily shipments of meat. But for one worker, their routine was about to take a terrifying turn. As they entered the massive freezer to retrieve a shipment of meat, the door slammed shut behind them, trapping them inside. At first, they tried to push the door open, but it wouldn't budge. Panic set in as they realized they were trapped, with no way to escape the freezing cold. As the minutes ticked by, the workers' fear only grew. The temperature was dropping quickly, and they were shivering uncontrollably. Just when they thought they couldn't take it anymore, they heard a strange noise coming from the back of the freezer. It was a low, raspy breathing, and it was getting closer. The worker tried to hide, but it was no use. The creature, a hulking mass of ice and frost, slowly emerged from the shadows, its eyes glowing with a malevolent light. The worker screamed and backed up against the wall, but the creature was too fast. It grabbed the worker with its icy grip and dragged them into the darkness, where they were never seen or heard from again. The next day, when the other workers finally found the door to the freezer open, they went inside to investigate. But all they found was a chilling silence, and no sign of the missing worker. To this day, no one knows what happened to them, and the incident remains shrouded in mystery and fear. It was a quiet night and the pizza delivery person was making their rounds, delivering piping hot pizzas to customers all over town. As they pulled up to the address of their next delivery, they couldn't help but feel a sense of unease. The house was dark and quiet, and the only sound was the wind blowing through the trees. The delivery person hesitantly approached the door and rang the bell, but there was no answer. They tried again, but still no response. Just as they were about to leave, they heard a faint sound coming from inside the house. It was a low, guttural growl, and it sent chills down their spine. Despite their fear, they pushed open the door and stepped inside. The house was dark and silent, but they could sense something was off. Suddenly, they heard the growl again, this time much closer. They spun around and saw a figure emerging from the shadows, their eyes glowing in the dark. The delivery person tried to make a run for it, but the figure was too fast. They grabbed the delivery person by the arm and pulled them into the shadows, where they were surrounded by a horde of other creatures, all growling and snarling. The delivery person was never seen or heard from again, and the only evidence of their fate was the half-eaten pizza that was found on the front porch of the house the next morning. To this day, locals tell stories of a creepy customer who lures unsuspecting delivery people into their lair, never to be seen again. The house remains abandoned, a dark and ominous reminder of the dangers of delivering pizza to the unknown. The hunter was an experienced outdoorsman, who had been tracking and hunting game in these woods for years. But this time was different. As he made his way deeper into the forest, he felt an uneasiness he had never felt before. The leaves rustled and the branches creaked, but there was no wind. The birds had stopped singing, and the only sounds were the hunter's footsteps. But then, he heard something else, a low growl, coming from up ahead. The hunter drew his rifle, and slowly approached the source of the sound. He peeked around a tree and saw a figure, shrouded in darkness. It was massive, with fur as black as coal and eyes that glowed red. The hunter aimed his rifle, but the figure was too quick. It pounced on him, knocking the rifle from his hands. The hunter struggled to get away, but the creature was too strong. It lifted him into the air, and the hunter felt its hot breath on his face. And then, just as quickly as it appeared, the creature was gone, leaving the hunter lying on the ground, badly shaken. He stumbled back to his camp, but he never ventured into those woods again. Years later, the hunter heard whispers of strange creatures in the forest, and he knew that he had come face to face with something beyond his wildest nightmares. And to this day, no one knows what truly lurks in the heart of those woods, and those who dare to venture too deep are never seen or heard from again. In the quiet of night, when the world was asleep, a giant dragon descended from the stars. It was a sight that no one had ever seen before, and the people were filled with terror and awe. The dragon was the size of a mountain, and its scales shone with an otherworldly light. Its eyes glowed like fiery orbs, and its breath was a torrent of flames. The ground shook as it landed, and the sky was lit up with its arrival. The people ran for their lives, seeking shelter from the monster that had come from the stars. but there was nowhere to hide, nowhere to run. The dragon was everywhere, its roar echoing across the land. For days and nights, the dragon rampaged through the countryside, leaving a trail of destruction in its wake. Cities were burned to the ground, and entire civilizations were reduced to ashes. And then, just as suddenly as it had appeared, the dragon vanished back into the stars. The world was left to pick up the pieces, wondering if the monster would ever return. Years passed, and people slowly started to rebuild their lives. But every now and then, on a quiet night, they could still hear the distant roar of the dragon, reminding them of the terror that had once come from the stars. The Johnson family lived in a remote cabin in the woods, far from civilization. They were self-sufficient, growing their own food and relying on themselves for protection. They loved their solitude, but as winter approached, they started to feel the isolation more acutely. One night, as the wind howled outside and snow piled up against the windows, the family heard a strange noise outside. At first, they thought it was just the wind, but as the sound grew louder and more persistent, they realized it was something else. They cautiously opened the door to find a pack of wolves, their eyes shining in the moonlight. The wolves circled the cabin, growling and snarling, as the family realized they were surrounded. The family tried to defend themselves, but they were no match for the wolves. The creatures broke into the cabin, their teeth and claws tearing through the wood as if it were paper. The family was overcome, one by one, until only a single survivor remained. That person huddled in a corner, listening to the wolves feasting on the bodies of their loved ones. They knew that they were next, and there was nowhere to run. The wolves were in control now, and the cabin in the woods was their domain. As the person closed their eyes, waiting for the end, they could still hear the howling of the wolves outside. And they knew that the pack would never stop hunting, never stop feasting, until there was nothing left. Once upon a time, there was a truck driver named Jack who was driving his rig through the mountains late at night. The road was treacherous, with sharp turns and steep drops, but Jack was a seasoned veteran and felt confident in his abilities. However, as he rounded a particularly sharp bend, he suddenly heard a loud pop from one of his tires. The truck began to fishtail, and Jack fought to regain control, but it was no use. The truck went careening off the edge of the mountain, tumbling down the rocky cliffside. Jack was thrown from the cab and blacked out as he hit the ground. When he came to, he was lying in a bed of rocks and dirt, his body battered and broken. The truck was nowhere to be seen, having plummeted even further down the cliff. Dazed and in pain, Jack tried to stand, but found that his leg was badly injured and he couldn't put any weight on it. He was stuck in the wilderness, with no way to call for help and no food or water. As the hours passed, Jack's desperation grew. He was lost in the wilderness with no hope of rescue. The moon rose high in the sky and strange sounds filled the night air, spurring Jack's imagination with all sorts of frightening possibilities. Just as he was about to lose all hope, he heard the sound of a helicopter overhead. He hobbled to his feet and began waving his arms, hoping to get the attention of the pilot. To his immense relief, the helicopter saw him and lowered a rescue team to his location. Thanks to the quick thinking and bravery of the rescue team, Jack was rescued and taken to safety. Though he was battered and broken, he was alive and grateful to have survived such a harrowing experience. From that day on, Jack never drove through the mountains at night again, and instead chose to stick to well-lit, well-traveled roads. He always looked back on his accident as a wake-up call, a reminder that anything can happen on the road and that he needed to be prepared for anything. There was once a seasoned hunter named Jack who lived in the deep forests of the Northern Territories. He was known for his bravery and hunting skills, and had never failed to bring back his prey from the forests. But one day, he took on a challenge that would change his life forever. Jack heard about a pack of wolves that had been terrorizing the nearby villages and decided to hunt them down. He was warned by the villagers about the pack's ferocity and cunning, but Jack was not one to back down from a challenge. So, he set out into the forest with his trusty hunting rifle and a backpack full of supplies. As he made his way deeper into the forest, Jack began to feel a sense of unease. The forest was eerily quiet, and not a single bird chirped or animal rustled in the bushes. Suddenly, he heard the howl of a wolf in the distance. Jack's heart began to race, but he tried to remain calm. He reloaded his rifle and continued forward, his senses on high alert. The howling grew louder and closer, and Jack realized that he was surrounded by the pack of wolves. They circled him, baring their teeth and growling fiercely. Jack's heart was pounding, but he stood his ground and aimed his rifle at the closest wolf. Just as he was about to pull the trigger, the largest and most imposing wolf among the pack stepped forward. It stared into Jack's eyes and let out a deafening howl. Jack could feel the power of the wolf, and for a moment, he was paralyzed with fear. But then, he remembered why he was there and why he had to do this. He took a deep breath and pulled the trigger, taking down the alpha wolf with one shot. The rest of the pack let out a mournful howl and scattered into the forest. Jack continued to hunt the pack for several days, until there were no more wolves left to terrorize the villages. He returned to the village as a hero, and the villagers thanked him for his bravery. From that day on, Jack was known as the hunter who overcame a pack of wolves. However, some say that on quiet nights, when the wind is just right, you can still hear the howls of the wolves echoing through the forests, reminding Jack and all who listen of the terror he faced and conquered. In a small village in ancient times, there was a towering statue that stood on the outskirts of the village. It was a statue of the village's protector deity and was said to bring good luck and prosperity to the villagers. But one day, everything changed. It was a dark and stormy night, and the villagers were huddled inside their homes as the winds howled and the rain beat against the roofs. Suddenly, they heard a loud noise coming from outside. They cautiously opened their doors to find that the statue had come to life and was attacking the village. The statue was massive, easily towering over the tallest buildings, and its stone arms were crushing homes and destroying everything in its path. The villagers were in a state of panic as they ran for their lives. The village leaders, who were said to have the power to communicate with the deity, tried to appease the statue by offering offerings and performing rituals. But nothing seemed to stop the statue's rampage. Days went by, and the statue showed no signs of stopping. The village was in ruins, and many lives were lost. Desperate for a solution, the village leaders decided to consult the wisest and oldest among them, a sage who lived in the nearby mountains. The sage listened to their plea and told them the story of a powerful sorcerer who had created the statue as a weapon of destruction. The sorcerer had imbued the statue with magic, so that it would come to life and attack the village if the sorcerer's enemies ever tried to take over the village. The sage also told the village leaders that the only way to stop the statue was to destroy the source of the magic, the sorcerer's enchanted staff, which was hidden deep within the statue's base. The village leaders, along with a brave and determined group of warriors, set out on a dangerous journey to the statue's base. They fought their way past the statue's defenses and finally reached the sorcerer's staff. With one final blow, the staff was destroyed, and the statue crumbled to the ground, the magic that brought it to life forever gone. The village was saved, but the memory of the statue's attack was never forgotten. It was passed down from generation to generation, serving as a warning to all of the power and danger that magic can bring. There was once a person named Sarah who lived a quiet life in a small town. She was a kind and gentle soul, always ready to help others in need. But one day, her life took a dark turn. Sarah started to receive threatening messages, but the strangest part was that they came from voices she couldn't see. At first, she thought it was just her imagination playing tricks on her. But as the messages became more frequent and the voices more sinister, she knew that something was terribly wrong. The voices whispered to her at night, when she was all alone, promising to do her harm if she didn't do as they commanded. Sarah tried to ignore them, thinking that if she didn't respond they would go away. But they only grew louder and more persistent. One day, Sarah received a message that told her to go to the old abandoned mansion on the outskirts of town. She knew she shouldn't go, but the voices were so persuasive that she couldn't resist. When she arrived at the mansion, she was met with a horrifying sight. The walls were covered in cryptic symbols, and the air was thick with the whispers of the voices. Sarah felt as if she was being watched, and she had the unmistakable feeling that she was not alone. She tried to leave, but the doors were locked, and the windows wouldn't budge. The voices grew louder and more menacing, and Sarah realized that she was trapped. She was in the grasp of some dark force, and it seemed that there was no escape. Just as she thought all was lost, she heard a voice that was different from the others. It was a voice of kindness, urging her to hold on and to never give up hope. With renewed determination, Sarah fought against the dark force, using the strength of her own will to break free. She stumbled out of the mansion, gasping for air, and ran back to the safety of her home. From that day on, she never heard from the voices again. But she never forgot the fear that they brought, and the lessons she learned about the power of the human spirit. There was once a man named Thomas who lived in a small city. No one really knew much about him, but he was known for his obsession with sweets. He would spend hours in the candy aisle of the grocery store, carefully selecting his favorites. One day, Thomas disappeared from the city. Weeks passed, and people started finding small wrapped candies all over the place, in the park, on the sidewalk, and even on their front porch. At first, everyone was excited and grateful to find the free treats. But then, strange things started happening. People who ate the candy began feeling sick. Some had hallucinations, while others felt dizzy and disoriented. As the days passed, more and more people started to fall ill, and soon it became clear that something was wrong. Investigations revealed that the candy was laced with a deadly poison, and the man responsible was none other than Thomas. It turned out that he had a twisted fascination with sweets and wanted to see the effect the poison would have on people. The city was thrown into a state of panic as people frantically tried to find the source of the candy. Thomas had left poisoned treats all over the city, and it seemed like there was no end in sight. The police launched a manhunt for Thomas, but he was nowhere to be found. It was as if he had vanished into thin air. Some say he was still out there, leaving poisoned candy for unsuspecting victims. Others say he was long gone, but his legacy lived on as a warning to always be careful of what you eat. The story of Thomas and his poisoned candy remains a frightening tale that is told to this day. People in the city still remember the terror that gripped their community, and they are always cautious when they see an unexpected treat left on the sidewalk. In a small village in ancient times, there was a towering statue that stood on the outskirts of the village. It was a statue of the village's protector deity and was said to bring good luck and prosperity to the villagers. But one day, everything changed. It was a dark and stormy night, and the villagers were huddled inside their homes as the winds howled and the rain beat against the roofs. Suddenly, they heard a loud noise coming from outside. They cautiously opened their doors to find that the statue had come to life and was attacking the village. The statue was massive, easily towering over the tallest buildings, and its stone arms were crushing homes and destroying everything in its path. The villagers were in a state of panic as they ran for their lives. The village leaders, who were said to have the power to communicate with the deity, tried to appease the statue by offering offerings and performing rituals. But nothing seemed to stop the statue's rampage. Days went by, and the statue showed no signs of stopping. The village was in ruins, and many lives were lost. Desperate for a solution, the village leaders decided to consult the wisest and oldest among them, the sage who lived in the nearby mountains. The sage listened to their plea and told them the story of a powerful sorcerer who had created the statue as a weapon of destruction. The sorcerer had imbued the statue with magic, so that it would come to life and attack the village if the sorcerer's enemies ever tried to take over the village. The sage also told the village leaders that the only way to stop the statue was to destroy the source of the magic, the sorcerer's enchanted staff, which was hidden deep within the statue's base. The village leaders, along with a brave and determined group of warriors, set out on a dangerous journey to the statue's base. They fought their way past the statue's defenses and finally reached the sorcerer's staff. With one final blow, the staff was destroyed, and the statue crumbled to the ground, the magic that brought it to life forever gone. The village was saved, but the memory of the statue's attack was never forgotten. It was passed down from generation to generation, serving as a warning to all of the power and danger that magic can bring. There was once a small village that was plagued by a mysterious illness. People would fall ill suddenly, and within days, they would die with no explanation. Fear spread through the village, and no one knew what was causing the illness or how to stop it. One day, a stranger came to the village, claiming to be a healer. He said that he could cure the illness and put an end to the villagers' suffering. The people were desperate, and they welcomed the stranger with open arms. The stranger went to work, visiting the sick and administering his treatments. At first, people started to get better, and hope returned to the village. But as time passed, strange things started to happen. People would disappear in the night, never to be seen again. And the stranger was always there, watching, with a sinister smile on his face. The villagers realized too late that the stranger was not a healer at all, but a dark being who had come to feed on their fear and suffering. They tried to drive him out of the village, but he was too powerful. The villagers were trapped in a never-ending cycle of illness and death, with no escape from the monster in their midst. From that day on, the village was forever cursed, and the monster continued to feed on the fear and suffering of those who lived there. The villagers tell the story to this day, warning others never to let a stranger enter their village, for fear of inviting the same fate. There was once a family who lived in a remote cabin deep in the forest. They were happy and content, enjoying the peace and solitude of their forest home. But one day, strange things started to happen. At night, they would hear strange noises coming from outside their cabin. They would see shadows moving in the trees, and they felt as if they were being watched. The family tried to ignore the strange happenings, thinking that they were just their imagination playing tricks on them. But the strange occurrences only grew more frequent and more intense. The family started to see ghostly apparitions, and they felt as if they were being stalked by something sinister. They were filled with fear, and they didn't know what to do. One night, the family was awakened by a loud banging on the door. When they opened it, they were confronted by a figure shrouded in darkness. It was a shadowy figure, with no face or form, and it seemed to be made entirely of shadows. The family was paralyzed with fear, and they could feel the cold touch of the shadow figure on their skin. It whispered to them in a voice that was both chilling and seductive, promising to take them to a place of peace and comfort. The family was torn. They were filled with fear, but at the same time, they were drawn to the figure and its promises. In the end, they followed the shadow figure into the darkness, never to be seen again. To this day, the forest is haunted by the ghostly apparitions of the family, and the shadow figure still wanders the forest, seeking new victims to take into the darkness. Those who dare to enter the forest tell of feeling watched, and they whisper of a sinister presence lurking in the shadows, waiting to claim its next prey. There was once a lone gunman named Ethan who lived a life on the run. He was a mercenary for hire, taking on dangerous jobs that no one else dared to do. But one day, he took on a job that would change his life forever. Ethan was hired to protect a wealthy businessman from an unknown assassin. The businessman claimed that the assassin was like nothing he had ever seen before, an entity made of shadows that could appear anywhere at any time. Ethan was skeptical, but the pay was too good to pass up. At first, everything seemed normal. Ethan guarded the businessman and made sure that he was safe. But on the third night of the job, Ethan was awoken by a chilling feeling, as if someone was watching him. He quickly grabbed his gun and searched the room, but found no one. That's when it started. The entity made of shadows began to attack. It would appear suddenly, its dark form striking at Ethan from all directions. Ethan was a skilled gunman, but he was no match for this thing. It was like trying to hit a shadow. Ethan was on the run, trying to find a way to escape the entity's grasp. He locked himself in a room, but the entity found a way in. Ethan was surrounded, with no escape in sight. Just as the entity was about to strike, Ethan remembered a trick he had learned in his mercenary days. He shot a bullet into a nearby mirror, shattering it. The shards of glass reflected the entity's shadow form, making it visible for just a moment. In that moment, Ethan was able to take aim and fire a shot that shattered the entity's shadow form, destroying it for good. Barely alive and covered in cuts from the shards of glass, Ethan stumbled out of the building and disappeared into the night, never to take on a job like that again. From that day on, he was known as the lone gunman who survived an attack by the assassin made of shadows. But he would never forget the fear that the entity brought, and he would always be looking over his shoulder, wondering when the shadows would come for him again.